Hi everyone. In this video, I will introduce an arts-based perspective on research, poetic inquiry, and the ways that poetry can be used reflexively as analytical processes and representational forms. The topics we'll discuss in this video include history of the use of poetry in qualitative research, poetical mode of thinking, and ways of thinking about poetic inquiry. The use of poetry in qualitative research is not new. As early as 1982, anthropologist Toni Flores was using poetry in her work. She realized that her poems served to add to one's observation of the process of observation and added a dimension to our study and methods. Poetic inquiry had its first real boost in qualitative research in the early 1990s when sociologist Laurel Richardson used found poetry to depict interesting stories she heard from her participants. Since the early 1980s, poetry in research has been described variously as field poetry, ethnographic poetics, poetic transcription, data poems, autoethnographic poetry, investigative poetry, research poetry, and poetic inquiry. The use of poetry in qualitative research has taken root across many disciplines that include anthropology, leadership, medicine, nursing, social work, and education. According to Levy, poetry is not just a representational form, but also another way of interpreting and thus understanding. Poetical thinking is one way of thinking about our data, understanding, and representing it. Poetical thinking, quote, privileges the figurative and performative dimensions of languages, images, and gestures over their literal or representational ones, quote. In other words, poetical thinking encourages languages, bodies, movements, or images lead the way. Poetical thinking, quote, mediates between real and possible felt worlds in ways that open up rather than close the potential for multiple interpretations, quote. It also, quote, transcends borders, connecting as well as dissolving and rearranging a dynamic world of felt experiences, quote. According to Butler-Kisper, there are two ways for framing and thinking about poetic inquiry: found poetry and generated poetry. We create a found poem when we use the exact words from transcripts and turn them into a poetic form, versus generated poetry, or more autobiographical poetry, can be produced when we use our own words to express participants' experiences. So you may ask how we can create a poem from a transcript. There are several ways to do so. I will be introducing the steps outlined by Butler-Kisper, 2018. First, read your transcript through a different lens. This time, you do not have to really think about your research questions. Try to see some eye-catching themes. Then highlight those eye-catching segments of the data. Next, develop some excerpts. Try to understand what those words and phrases that seem important really mean. Then you can combine the phrases from the transcript. Finally, look for keywords for your title. Depending on whether you are interested in a found or generated poetry, you may choose to change words and phrases from the transcript. Here is an example of found poetry from Ohlen's work in 2003 entitled Evocation of Meaning Through Poetic Condensation of Narratives in Empirical Phenomenological Inquiry into Human Suffering. This is a comparison between verbatim transcription in dialogue format and transcription with poetic condensation. You may want to pause the video here to see how specific excerpts from the transcript became lines in this poetic representation. If you would like to read and learn more about poetic inquiry, you can check out the reference list attached along this video. Happy reading and learning. Thank you for listening.